Welcome to Champagne Problems Podcast. I am your host, Robbie Shaw. Join us as we explore mental and emotional well-being, physical optimization, and the journey to discovering your highest self. Champagne Problems is brought to you in proud partnership with Bond Buzz, the alcohol-free social spirit. Bond Buzz is an award-winning alcohol-free functional beverage company creating adult drinks that are health-forward, all-natural, and uncompromising. They're on a mission to create a future where feeling good and getting buzzed exist in absolute harmony and not at the expense of your health. Their bold concoctions offer focus and energy while calming the nervous system for a night on the town or a productive afternoon. Bond Buzz uses only natural ingredients and a hyperfunctional blend of nootropics, adaptogens, and functional mushrooms to amplify the sensory experience. If you're looking for a drink to help you cool off after work or a drink to stimulate your mind and body without the harmful, icky hangovers, drink Bond Buzz for good days only. Jamie Brown, Dr. Nicole Fodel, Dr. Carlos Jorge, welcome to Champagne Problems.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
Very honored you all decided to join me today. I really appreciate you all agreeing to participate. I'm very excited about this conversation. I've known Jamie for a number of years. I think the first time we met was when our kids were like kindergarten, first grade.
That's right, in elementary school.
So, do some math, and that's like, what, 7, 8 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
right.
7 or 8 years ago. And I remember kind of hitting it off because I learned that you played basketball at Davidson as well as your identical twin, same year, which was interesting. But more so more recently, I learned about your journey through some mental health experiences and nutritional changes that you found to be a solution. And that's what I'm excited to talk about today. And I've brought on two. I'll let you introduce yourselves before I try to give you some sort of introduction. But first, I like to do a rapid fire questioning more so. And we're going to do all three of you. And I'm going to start with Dr. Jorge. Okay. What was your first live music concert and where?
First live music was Los Hermanos Rosario. It was a merengue group in Dominican Republic, Santiago.
Ah!
Wow.
I was very young.
That's a first.
That's where I'm from. So, yes.
Very cool. Very cool. Jamie?
Oh, it's the same question.
Same question.
I was hoping it'd be a different question.
No,
Robbie.
we got new ones coming.
Okay.
I want to know this. That's why I ask.
Geez Louise. I think it was New Kids on the Block in like 8th grade.
Wow.
Yeah, something
Love
like
it.
that. Yeah.
Love it.
It was like kind of like punk rock, like Nick NoFX, like that type of stuff.
Yeah, I love it.
It was like a previous life.
Yeah. Oh, that's the exciting part of this question. I have a lot of friends that sit here and say New Kids on the Block. And I'm like, oh, really?
Oh, yeah.
All right. So next question, Dr. Jorge, what's your favorite smell?
Gosh, I love bread when it's baking and garlic.
Great answer.
Cooking.
Great answer.
I was going to say onions cooking because it reminds me of when my mom would cook when I was younger, and that's how the house smelled.
Oh, blackened onions.
Yeah, that's right.
I will say coffee, and I don't even drink coffee every day.
Really?
So comforting.
All right, let's run it back this way. Your least favorite smell?
Cigarettes,
Great answer.
by
Great
and
answer.
large.
Probably like back streets behind an alley, like where a dumpster is of a restaurant.
Of a restaurant.
Trash.
The grease
Trash.
thing.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah, grease traps, terrible. Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Probably like burning plastic, kind of like that.
Yeah.
Chemical smell.
Yep. All right. I assume you all read. What's a book you're reading right now?
I am reading a book by a guy named Scott Galloway. He's a professor at NYU Stern Business School called The Algebra of Wealth.
Sounds exciting.
I'm reading Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way.
Lovely.
I just started reading Mere Christianity.
Got it. Beautiful. All right, last question. Cerebral one. If you could know the answer to any question, what would you ask?
I would love to know how our energy is all connected with one another.
Yes.
That's very interesting.
Yes. I love that it's how, not if.
Oh, that's how I feel.
Right.
Yeah.
I know.
Too many weird things happen,
Oh,
you know?
totally agree. Totally agree.
I would love to know when Jesus will return.
Ooh,
Okay.
love it.
I would love to know why, from an evolutionary standpoint, we can't breathe underwater anymore.
Anymore.
Interesting.
Yes.
Interesting.
Beautiful. All right. Well, now I know you all somewhat personally. Let's get to know you professionally. Nicole, let's start with you. Dr. Fodel, let's start with you. Give us a little intro into what you do now and kind of what led to what you do now.
So my training, I'm a chiropractor, and then I also have a master's in Chinese medicine. So I practice functional medicine. I don't do like hands-on chiropractic. I basically practice like a naturopath, but in North Carolina, naturopaths are not licensed. So I became a chiropractor so that I could order labs and do all the things that I would need to do. And I just thought my goal, like going through school, I always thought I wanted to be a medical doctor. And when I was in college and was volunteering in the hospital, like every floor, that I volunteered on with all different types of physicians, they all said, it's not what you think it is. We have 15 minutes with our patients. We are run by government, like insurance companies. And it really kind of put a damper on it for me. So I chose the holistic path, and I started my own practice right out of school. And so it really forced me to learn quickly. And I've just had huge success with helping people holistically with all sorts of things: autoimmune conditions, hormone imbalances, digestive, dermatology. Those are really my main areas, I would say. I do a lot with kids, babies, really all ages, men, women. So
Very cool. Thank you for that short bio. So I just have a quick question. So chiropractic, you don't practice it?
right. So a lot of people don't realize chiropractic education involves more than just adjusting. Like we learn all of the radiology, we learn immunology, all the hormone, all the endocrinology, all of the immune, we learn the whole body, like head to toe. We dissect a cadaver like a real cadaver, like you would in medical school. There's certain schools that are more medical. I went to National, which is in Chicago. Like the schools closer here, Sherman and Life in South Carolina and Atlanta, respectively, they're more adjusting based. So I chose to go to Chicago knowing I wanted to do more like medical, internal medicine things with it. So my training is that, but I just only focus on the internal medicine side.
Got
In the
it.
beginning, I did everything. I adjusted, I did everything. And then when I got to where I was really busy, I just dropped the adjusting.
Got it. So it's for an education and a licensure standpoint.
Right. But I mean,
That's
the
cool.
education was huge
Right.
because I learned the holistic way of looking at, everyone thinks because of my master's in Chinese medicine, they're like, oh, you're doing Eastern medicine. I'm like, no, this is Western medicine. Like I'm talking about your actual heart. I'm talking about your actual liver, your actual gallbladder. I'm not talking about the Chinese, the energetic Chinese side of your organs. I'm talking about we just treat it with herbs versus these drugs or versus, what the medical route. So it's still Western medicine. It's just natural.
Got it. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Doc?
Well, so I am originally traditionally family practice, board certification in family practice. I've been in Charlotte for 22 years, had a traditional practice for many years, and did 2 other board certifications throughout probably the last 12 years. So lipidology, cardiovascular disease preventative work, and then functional integrative medicine, did a board certification in that in 2016. And so differently than chiropractic, kind of my Western medicine sort of training was in Chicago as well, actually. in family practice. But kind of one of the things that drew me to functional integrative medicine and really a lot of longevity medicine that we do also in our practice is just personal experience with one of our children who had some health issues, and us finding kind of that the traditional approach wasn't really delivering what we expected from the results. So both my wife and I kind of really changed the way we our lifestyle, what we ate, how we ate, all those things. So functional integrative medicine now at our practice is the principal thing we do. We balance it with traditional medicine as well. So I kind of straddle sometimes, I say, okay, I'm going to take my, functional integrative piece off and let me put the traditional side on, to be able to kind of offer that to the clients that we see here in Charlotte. So,
Got it. Yeah. Love it. And now you.
Now me, I'm not a doctor or anything.
I know you're not a doctor.
No,
and so we're not going to talk about that. So what we would love to hear is a little bit of a bio on you. Who are you and how did you kind of get to Charlotte and do what you do? I know these things, but I'd love for our listeners to know. And then the big part would be to tell your experience that I referred to earlier. And then we can kind of go from there, if that's cool with you.
Yeah, absolutely. So my husband and I have been in the restaurant business for about 15 years now, and we own and operate 5 concepts here, and we're working on a 6th and have a couple more in the pipeline. And, I obviously my world is inundated with food, and I've gone on this very interesting journey about 6 years ago where my health really began to deteriorate. It was after having 3 children, and there were so many different symptoms going on that I didn't realize were connected. But the most painful of all of them was the struggle with mental health that I had. I know throughout my life, I've had moments where I've struggled with depression, in my 20s or, sometimes when I had some drinking problems in my 20s too. But, and I can connect those dots now. But, I had struggled with some issues throughout my life, but I had always maintained a pretty level mind, and I always felt pretty adventurous about life. But in my late 30s, I suddenly began to kind of close in. I remember my sister saying that you're like nothing's left but a shell. Like there was nothing there, and it was literally I had lost complete confidence. I had really just in the evenings I'd have to close myself inside because I struggled so much with high anxiety, and that moved quickly into panic attacks that were happening on a daily basis, sometimes twice a day. And I never knew what I was going to get from one day to the next. And, it sounds strange to me now thinking that how did I not connect the dots with what I was eating and how I was feeling? Because I always ate pretty healthily. I ate the way you expect someone to eat. Like I would have Raisin Bran for breakfast, and I would have
some roughage.
Raisin Bran for breakfast, and I would have a salad or soup for lunch, maybe a sandwich. Dinner would be pasta or rice and Chipotle. I love me those Chipotle bowls. I would have this food, and I always thought I'm eating balanced. I'm eating normal. I always stayed relatively thin and fit, so I thought I was healthy. But I think my body really surprised me. It was talking to me and telling me you need to do something different, and I hadn't connected the dots. And it took me a while to do that, but once I did, it has been something that I will never change back to, in a large degree anyway, because I know how differently I feel versus those times when I was in the absolute depths.
Wow.
Does that help?
Yeah, it does. It does. And I've got more questions. There's so many places we could go with that. So you change your diet. These symptoms start to go away pretty quickly.
Yeah, so I basically, I was struggling with this anxiety and panic attacks that were going on. I mean, it was happening for about 6 months where I couldn't show up for my family. I remember talking to my husband about I think I need to just check in somewhere.
Yeah.
And then I'm not there for my kids. There's all of that. And So trying to figure out like how I could be a mom and show up for them and like literally get through every day. And it was literally hour by hour. Like sometimes be like, I would hold, I'd be cooking and I'd hold my phone in one hand with a hotline number ready to hit because you're fighting these suicidal thoughts constantly. And, I think there's a very big difference between anxiety and then, and high anxiety.
Yeah.
There's a spectrum and,
Right, for sure.
I'm sure you guys have suggestions on like low anxiety. There are things you can do. I know I can sniff that out like this now. I know when it's coming on and I know what to do. But when you have high anxiety, that is a totally different issue.
It's loss
and
of control.
It's loss of complete control. Yeah. But the day, I stumbled around for about 6 months with that. And then it was the middle of the night in August. I remember I shot out of bed. It was 2 a.m. And this thought came over me. Is this about bacteria? Could this be like rabies? And I know that sounds weird, but it also may not. Could this be like something that I can't control because it's taking over or something? And so the next day I started looking for different diets and how I could maybe feed myself differently. Once I turned to the autoimmune protocol diet, I've never had a panic attack since. And that was 5.5 years ago. And I just feel so grateful that I kind of stumbled upon it and found some different answers that I know that you two probably see a whole lot of in your worlds.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that we talk about, especially in the functional medicine world, kind of a chronic inflammatory response that people have, and there's multiple triggers that may occur from that. It could be, past Lyme infections, mold toxicity, heavy metals, other infections, certainly food, hormones, et cetera. So it's the manifestation and end result of that inflammatory cascade that then triggers a response, be it anxiety, be it skin issues, et cetera. So, it's something we see, and I'm sure Dr. Fodel sees it as well a lot, trying to figure out why someone gets that end immune dysregulation, be it your brain's inflamed and that triggers anxiety, depression, or other behavioral things. And then how do we kind of identify and reverse is sort of the big, where we spend a lot of time trying to figure out. The thing is, you did a lot of it on your own, which is great. And unfortunately, I don't think most people don't take the time or even, I think we were talking before we came on that you spent 2 years journaling, food, which is impressive, but most people, honestly,
don't do that.
it's a challenge to get a lot of folks to do some of that work. And, it is something that does have a significant value because you start identifying and seeing patterns of, different foods or different responses to things that you may be doing. So,
I find that the reason people fail when doing just food is because they just do one thing. They're like, I stopped eating gluten and nothing got better, so my problem isn't gluten. Or I stopped eating dairy and it didn't get better, so my problem isn't dairy. I'm like, no, your problem is definitely gluten. It's definitely dairy, but it's probably a few other things too. So just like if you were being poisoned by 3 different types of rat poison and you stopped one of them, but you were ingesting the other 2, you're not going to feel better because you stopped the one. The other 2 are keeping you sick. And so you just still feel sick. And the same thing, if you are having trouble with tomatoes and corn and gluten and dairy, and you stop gluten, but you're still eating dairy, corn, and tomatoes, you don't feel any better. You may feel slightly better that you stopped gluten, but then you think, well, it's not gluten because I stopped it and I don't feel better. But if you stop all the things that are bothering you and then you feel better, then when you eat just one of them, you feel bad because you have the reintroduction of one of them. So it is, usually like my first thought when somebody has symptoms like that is there's some infection that has gotten in, whether it's bacteria or parasite or a virus that has set off the inflammatory cascade. And then when we eat inflammatory foods that we have eaten our whole life, they become a problem because we are now inflamed. So usually treatment involves removing the food, but also clearing out the infection, getting rid of the metals, getting rid of the mold in the home, whatever it is. So it is impressive that it resolved with your diet alone.
Is there an autoimmune aspect to this?
So to me, I think very much so.
Okay.
And I had shared before, I know Dr. Fodel knows this too, but my identical twin sister, who I played basketball with at Davidson, she is a type 1 diabetic. And I always wonder about, they had told me when she was diagnosed at the age of 31 with type 1 diabetes, they said, hey, you as the identical, you have a 40% chance of having this disease as well. And of course, I took note of that and understood that kind of, but I think what I've learned over time myself, and I think it'd be interesting to hear your perspectives too, is that autoimmunes just manifest themselves differently in different bodies, and it may be different triggers or depending upon your environment. My sister, when she was diagnosed, was living in New York City, fast-paced lifestyle, not as much sunshine, very busy lifestyle, big job, that kind of stuff. How maybe your perspectives on the relationship between those.
Before you answer, can we give our listeners kind of a general definition of what an autoimmune disease or issue is?
I think in the simplest terms to think about is your immune system, which helps to protect you against bacteria or the recent thing that all of us know, COVID and other viruses. Your immune system is there. There's different types of immune system that we have, and it's there to protect you, right? I mean, it fights off infections. It fights off when you scratch yourself and you get a cut and how it heals. Those are all parts of your immune system. The word auto, as it suggests, is your immune system for some reason gets dysregulated. And now instead of, in essence, protecting you, it's now attacking some of the own cells in your body. So examples of autoimmune disorders, Hashimoto's, which affects the thyroid, skin disorders, things like eczema, psoriasis, lupus, rheumatoid arthritis. There's a whole slew of autoimmune disorders that can happen. And the interesting thing with autoimmune disorders, is that about 1 in 5 people now in the United States has an autoimmune disorder. If you take that and you look at the population data from that, it's about 55 million people, right? So if you think about that, that's an insane amount of people to have an autoimmune disorder. And in the past, like when I was training, again, 25, almost 27 years ago, autoimmune disorders were just that. Like we didn't know what kind of caused it. It just, for some reason, your system just started attacking you. Okay. Fast forward now, and especially in the world that we sort of practice in functional and integrative medicine, is to say, hey, it doesn't make sense that you just start having an autoimmune disorder. Like genetics, certainly you have a predisposition, and there's certainly a genetic predisposition that exists. About probably 20% of the population may be predisposed to some of this stuff. However, what are the triggers that can happen? So food is a trigger, infection.
Yeah, there's no gene that says no matter what you will have this autoimmune condition. It has to be triggered.
Yeah.
Right. It's that turning on and off of that gene. And then really trying to understand okay, well, what is that kind of cause or root cause of what has turned this gene or this expression on? And then how do we identify, what are these other sort of mechanisms that have affected and causing this?
Yeah. And the big thing, the two main things that trigger autoimmunity are food and infections. So type 1 diabetes, we believe to be a virus that has attacked the pancreas. The reason that this has happened is why it's increased so much is in the population is because I believe our food. So 80% of our immune system is inside of our intestines, our gut. We have different immune, like he mentioned, systems like in our blood, which would be different than in our gut. Our lymph would be different, also. But our intestines are only one cell wall thick. It's not like layers and layers like our skin. So it's not like a very thick interface. So if we are ingesting a food that's inflammatory, then it can very easily break that barrier. And so then things that should stay inside of our intestines leak out into the bloodstream.
Leaky gut, is that where that comes from?
So then you have viral particles, bacterial particles, parasites going into the bloodstream. The immune cells there are not equipped to deal with that. So they're like, oh, what is this? The body sets off the inflammatory cascade trying to just deal with it. That's how our body heals, is by creating inflammation. But the purpose of inflammation is to dump it, heal it, clear it. So when we just keep dumping it, we just stay inflamed. that becomes very confusing for the immune system. So autoimmunity, some people think like, oh, my immune system is so strong, it's attacking myself. It's like, no, it's confused. It's doing the wrong thing. It's attacking yourself when it shouldn't. The thing that is, to back up to why is this happening with our food. So our immune system, as far as recognizing food, is like a computer. So we recognize protein structures. So when we eat a carrot, our body says, carrot. We eat asparagus. Well, when we eat, say, corn, now corn has been genetically modified. So we ingest corn, our body's like, don't recognize this, must not be food, must be a foreign invader, attack. And so, certain things like, we know potatoes are genetically modified, soy, corn, beets. Other things like gluten or wheat is not technically genetically, it's more of like a hybrid. It's not necessarily modified like the actual gene structure like corn and soy, but we've taken like two different wheat crops and combined them to make it more hardy or sturdy to prevent weather damage so that it can last longer. So again, we ingest this and our body doesn't handle it well. And then everything is made out of that. Corn is in everything. And so day after day after day, year after year after year, we're eating all this inflammatory food. Our gut is constantly inflamed. Stuff's leaking out all over the place. The immune system can't keep up. It just gets tired. So then the immune system kind of stops responding. It's like, you're eating this food 3 times a day for the last however many years. I am tired. And so it kind of stops responding. And then we eat a parasite. We take in a virus or bacteria. Well, if our immune system isn't responding like it should, they just set up shop and just live their best life. And then we're eating all these carbohydrates and sugar, which feed those infections. And then these infections get into our different organs and our glands. And then our liver gets gunked up. Our hormones can't shift. Our periods get all screwed up. Every man has low testosterone. It just snowballs into all of these imbalances. And that's why people say, when I go to Europe and I eat gluten, I feel fine. I'm like, right, because you don't actually, if you're actually eating a real wheat crop, your body is like, oh, that's wheat.
Right.
And it can digest it. If you are actually eating a food that your body recognizes as food, it's okay. And so in general, in other countries, they don't allow all the pesticides and chemicals and additives that we allow here. So in general, when people go away, they're like, I feel amazing just eating the food here, even drinking the wine. There's not all the sulfites and colors and junk added to it. So they're like, I drink wine like at lunch and dinner, and I feel totally fine. So it's really, I feel like, a product of our food that has set us up to not properly fight off infections. And then you have the combination of the food and the infection problem triggering autoimmunity. And obviously we know cancer is just off the charts, and it's all kind of the same thing.
Yeah, I agree with most of that. I think it's hard to some cases always sort of pinpoint a bacteria or parasite or virus as let's say the offending variable in that sort of cascade of things. And so, I think as you look at the system-wide sort of approach to what you want to try to identify as the causal effect, the causal agent for these things, it becomes challenging. And in the traditional, I would say, medical practice, when a lot of folks come in for for an autoimmune disorder evaluation, it's unfortunately in the traditional practice much simpler to just, we can treat, we can knock the immune system, down, put it back in its place if we have to. How do we do that? Well, steroids, all these new disease-modifying agents. And these are incredible, powerful medications that certainly in some folks have a role. It's understanding, how to utilize some of these things, but also really working on all the other causal agents that are triggering this dysregulation of the immune system to kind of really build a roadmap to healing for people. Because bacteria, parasites, viruses, not everyone will have those we all are exposed to those things. You travel anywhere, you're going to get exposed to something. But whether or not your immune system then further dysregulates from that. But certainly the food as a triggering agent, especially with pesticides and chemicals that we're exposed to day in and day out, it's a burden that our system just can't compensate. And so, kind of circling back to your sort of journey, it's like how that triggers an inflammatory response in the brain that then kind of dysregulates neurotransmitters and how you handle your day-to-day stress and turning it into a high anxiety situation.
Mm-hmm. So one of the things that I had done after I changed my diet and I realized, oh my gosh, the dots started connecting, I went up to the Cleveland Clinic because they were at the time the only functional medicine department that was operating out of a hospital. So I went up, there was Mark Hyman's clinic up there. And of course, they did bacterial analysis on the gut and everything. And I showed a severe dysbiosis in my gut. And I thought it was really interesting. I remember looking at
that, by the way?
Imbalance.
Okay.
So thank you. Can't keep up with my very technical medical terms.
That's good.
That's really good. Anyway, so one of the things I thought was so interesting is they gave me kind of a breakdown on my paperwork that said the different bacteria and what I was high in. And some of them showed, okay, you're high in this, and this is very commonly associated with mood disorders. I thought it's so interesting to me how that works. And, my eyes were opened with that. And, to this day, I really try to focus on just today, how am I feeding my gut biome today? And I don't know if that's like, sometimes I wonder, am I just living in today and I'm not helping myself get better? Or is this just actually the way that I should be eating? And, where today I eat for today, and I know that today, the type of day I need is one that is empowered. I need to feel, I like to feel risky and bold to go out there and like do the projects that we're working on and take on more and lead our team of 230 people. And, I need to be present and strong. And so I feed myself that way for today. And sometimes I wonder, am I missing a key point of like, how do you heal for the long term so that I can eat something else or what, like have more freedom in my diet? Or is it just the way that it is? I've accepted it for how it is and I am fine with it. But I also, I wonder if there are other answers, or is this just the life that I have, and it's okay.
Well, unless our food source changes, you have to avoid it. It's not your body that is the problem. It's the food that is the problem. So we were designed to eat real food. So we can't make our bodies able to eat something that we shouldn't be eating. So like I mentioned, if you're eating clean food, you feel good. When you're eating bad food, you feel bad. So when people are like, my goal is to eat popcorn, I'm like, well, it's genetically modified. Like it's not actually what your body recognizes as food. So it's like you're trying to do something that your body isn't designed to do. And that is the unfortunate thing.
So why some and not others?
I don't think that. I think everybody's having trouble. They just don't.
It just manifests differently?
They don't know how. Yeah. Some people have zero digestive complaints. They have no gas, no bloating. They have perfectly normal bowel movements. And so they don't realize, but I'm sure they have something. They either have a skin issue, migraines, a mood disorder, joint pain. They have something. Like nobody is eating this food and having no symptoms. I don't believe it. Like I've never, they think because their stomach doesn't hurt that it's not the food.
Right.
It's difficult to say that it's not happening at a larger scale with most people. Just especially, it's very difficult, even as, let's say, as strict as you can be with kind of where you purchase your food, how unless you're growing all your own food and everything is being kind of produced in a way that you are controlling for, it's difficult to, I think, control all those variables. So I think the next step of maybe your healing journey has to be, well, I've changed the biggest variable that I introduce personally into my system, but then how do I, further build resiliency into my system, right? So understanding how do you support your gut? How do you then kind of strengthen that to make sure that, as you mentioned, the leaky gut or the dysbiosis, which is just an imbalance of healthy or, unhealthy gut bacteria or parasites that may be present or other things that may be present. So next steps of like healing have to be resiliency. What other things do I need to work on? Well, stress management and sleep and all your hormones. It now starts this sort of the systems kind of approach of how these things all interplay with each other. But I agree. I think food as the source, and we always talk with our clients, it's like we don't want to take always away. We want to sort of talk about how do we introduce whole foods more into your diet. And then over time, you're crowding out the Chipotle bowl that you may have had. I'm not knocking on Chipotle, but
Boy, I
again,
love
it's
that
just,
bowl.
yeah, so it is something that I think it's you've done the hard work, and often that hard work is that big change that most people have to make. And then once you've done that, then a lot of these other pieces are just, kind of part of the healing journey.
Are you a big believer in this, in bone broth as a healing agent? Like, you're talking about like the gut lining and so forth for healing that. And like, is that something that one can actually heal, or is it just some people just struggle with that more?
I mean, you have to, and I'll let Nicole speak, but after I think you have to identify what the offending agents are that are triggering the inflammation and the breakdown in the gut. And there's very sophisticated tests out there. There's multiple companies that have great gut testing. The one that you mentioned probably was done at Cleveland, but there's lots of companies that offer that where you can understand what's going on at the gut level. And then I think from there, there's bone broth. There's lots of other supplements and glutamine. I mean, there's tons of things that we can offer to folks to help them kind of start healing the cellular structure of their gut. But again, I do think it really has to start with how you fuel and how you feed yourself. At the same time, stress and lack of sleep are huge disruptors to gut health. So focusing on the balancing, meditation, breath work, sleep sort of hygiene, and working on healing those things as well has to be part of it. Because just fixing one thing is usually not enough for most people, as you were saying. It's just a
Right.
component of.
And I do believe most people are not clearing their underlying infections. And I see this all the time. People come in and they are like, I did every stool test. I have all these labs. I don't have parasites. I don't have yeast. I don't have, I did the SIBO test. I did all this. And I'm like, no, you have an infection. There's no way you get to this state where your hair is falling out. You have acne on your body. Like, this is an infection. And a lot of people really struggle to identify infections because they're relying on labs or stool test and they're just not, they don't show everything. Like we have, you can do there's like 300 parasites that can infect humans. And so if you do a stool test that has 30 agents and, someone comes in and they're like, I have pimples on my butt. I'm like, that is in my training by definition a parasite. And they'll say, well, my parasite test is clear. I'm like, no, you don't have one of these 30 parasites. Doesn't mean you don't have one. Or, we can do like a CBC, which is a blood test, and you can look at the differential and you can see, like in my training, we look at if the neutrophils are higher than they should be and the lymphocytes are lower than they should be, that is tending towards a bacterial infection. If the reverse is true, it's tending toward a viral infection. And you can see, okay, this person is carrying a viral load. I see it in their CBC. Their white blood cells are reflecting it. But then you can check all the, you can check cytomegalo, you can check Epstein-Barr, you can do like these huge viral panels to try to identify which one it is. It doesn't show up, but you see it in the white blood cells. You see it in their symptoms. So it doesn't matter which one it is. We're just going to put them on an antiviral protocol. The same thing, like, I don't care if your test says you don't have a parasite, your body is telling us you do, and you're sick. So we use other things that are very specific with looking at the body, looking at the tongue, looking at the skin, looking at your hair. There's so many things we look at that I learned is a combination of with chiropractic and Chinese medicine to kind of hone in on is this a virus? Is it bacteria? Is it yeast or mold? Or is it a parasite? Because what I have learned by and large is that there's always some infection that is being missed or not treated. And that is my specialty, is infection. So people come to me from all sorts of other doctors saying they've done all these labs, they've done everything. They say I don't have it's not an infection, but I'm just inflamed. All my inflammatory markers are high. I'm like, no, it is an infection. It just hasn't been treated yet. And so if you're just drinking bone broth and you're infected,
Right.
it's not going to work. But if you clear out the infection and you get rid of the inflammatory foods, now you've gotten rid of your two inflammatory agents, the infections and the foods, then you can heal. So you can use glutamine, you can use bone broth, you can use, tons, aloe, like slippery elm, marshmallow root. There's just, it doesn't matter the agent. You can heal it with so many different things.
And how do you treat the majority of infections?
I use herbs.
Yeah.
So herbs are very, very, very anti-infective. They're like the root of drugs is, the chemical agents in herbs is what we originally used to make drugs. So, we use them very effectively. We use companies that have very high potency, like we know how to use them. So we treat MRSA, staph, strep, UTIs, all these things that people are like, oh my God, some things you can use herbs, but for this, you have to have an antibiotic. Like, no, you can actually treat this still with herbs. So it's just knowing, like, you're trained, like, do you know how to use the herbs properly to get rid of the infection? Like, if you're just using vitamin C, and no, that's not going to cut it. Like, you have to use high amounts, long enough, in the right way to clear these infections. But you can definitely do it without, a lot of the drugs they can be effective, but they're hugely damaging to the liver. They're not like really a long-term solution. Whereas herbs, it would take just forever for it to, cause any amount of trouble. So it's just like a completely different approach.
Let's talk about allergies and sensitivities. Where does that fall? Because, I've tested for these things, and I understand that there's still these markers, the inflammatories and the infections. But if I'm allergic to nuts, where does that fall in there?
So if you're truly allergic, like if you're having an IgE response to a food, by definition, allergy is an IgE response. If you have a sensitivity, it could be IgI, IgM, IgA, IgG. Like you could have another immune response to a food. IgE testing is pretty accurate. It's not completely accurate. IgG testing is so inaccurate that it's kind of, I don't even waste money doing it. It's so inaccurate. So if you're saying you have a true allergy, then that is your immune system within minutes to hours responding to a food. There's a lot of different theories of why we have that. Some people think that vaccines as a child screwed up the immune system and make us then respond poorly to foods. It seems like people are definitely born with allergies. So there's some level of it being passed down somehow.
Is there a similarity between autoimmune and allergies?
It's the same system. Obviously, it's just there's a dysregulation. IgE is one of the components of the immune system. And an allergy, is probably there's, a genetic predisposition, and then certainly exposure to certain foods triggering an early response when you're younger. But there's probably a genetic predisposition why folks do. But certainly, again, the food sources, the modification of foods. Again, in our sort of world as well, like thinking about exposures over time to, things that trigger your immune system to get activated. And then how does your system sort of respond to, we eat, cauliflower and broccoli today. Well, anything you introduce into your system forms an immune response. I don't care if you're drinking water with a little bit of lemon, like your body says, okay, is this water and lemon? Okay, cool. I can process that, no issue. There are some folks that have a dysregulated response to any of these things, and that will determine whether or not you form an IgE response or you form IgG, IgA, et cetera, which are the idea of sensitivities is that you still are stimulating your immune system. And is there potentially an inflammatory then like response that happens with that? So as we, if you, we do use food sensitivities, but we use it as part of a kind of comprehensive look at things to say, look, this doesn't mean you can't ever eat this food. It's just saying, be mindful of how you feel when you eat something. Like, did you notice a response over eating this consecutively for several days? Be documenting these things. So getting folks a little bit more in tune to the response is how we talk about more sensitivities. There are tons of companies that offer sensitivity testing, and they're all looking at the same things. They're just looking at IgA or IgG, and how to utilize that is just finding something that helps you navigate that, I think, is important. So, the true allergy, things like celiac disease, things like true peanut allergies that people swell. I mean, those are things you don't want to mess around with because those can be certainly life-threatening very quickly. And so it's knowing the difference, and there's good testing for IgE, RAS testing, and good allergy testing to figure out whether you have a true allergy to something.
Something I found that was very interesting on my journey was as soon as I switched to an elimination diet where I went to the AIP diet, that first week I stopped having panic attacks, which was amazing. Like that was like biggest thing gone, and I could feel it right away. But from there, I started noticing, oh my gosh, I am sensitive to everything. So as soon as I brought everything down, I had to whittle my diet down even further. I was eating 11 foods, literally, for 4 months. And it's because anytime I would try to eat carrots, celery, cilantro, fennel, I would get itchy all over the place.
So whenever you're allergic to everything, you're not actually, or sensitive, like you're not actually allergic or sensitive to all those foods. There's something really awry with the gut if you're reacting that way.
Right.
So obviously the bacteria or whatever infection you had was creating that. So when you clear the gut, clear the infections, then the person brings back all these foods because it wasn't actually the food. Like, yes, if they have an IgE response, I'm like, okay, you're going to have to avoid that food. I'm not going to tell the person, oh, when we get your gut healed, you're going to be able to eat that food that gives you an anaphylactic reaction. Like some people actually do, but it's not an expectation that I would tell someone. Whereas if someone comes in and they say, at this other doctor's office, I did this test and everything lit up like a Christmas tree. I'm like, okay, well don't worry. You're not actually having trouble with that many foods.
Because I eat all of those foods now.
Right.
But it took a long time to get there. And like I had to stop eating any kind of FODMAP food too. My arms would go numb.
Cleared the infection out quickly, it would have gone faster, the reintroduction of foods.
Yeah.
What's the FODMAP?
Well, I can't. I only can say the acronym FODMAP. I don't.
Fermented oligosaccharide. What's the other one? Gosh, the AP of it. It's
ingredients.
It's just another.
It's like sugars that are produced in your body based on the type of food that you eat. But a lot of vegetables fall in this category, and when I would eat them, my arms would go numb, literally from my elbows down, and it scared the crap out of me because I now suddenly couldn't use my arms, So that was about a month in after changing my
tendencies.
Yeah, I do.
To answer your question.
Yeah. So it's all there. But like I know what to do now. I know I can eat all those foods, but everything is very, in my life, portion controlled. I can eat onions, but not too many onions. I can eat a little bit of cauliflower. Yes, that's fine. There are some vegetables and things that I can eat anything of, like arugula. Body is fine with arugula, Eat all the arugula you want. Water. My husband always jokes. He's like, she would like some water and air.
Yeah.
Could you have water and air?
Dessert.
So, yeah.
But
Water.
Environmental allergies, to just finish that, do get hugely better with, like when someone has a true, like per allergy test, a response to something in the environment. When we do the gut healing, so many people just every year after year, oh my gosh, my allergies are not flaring
I don't have
up like
to take
they used
allergy
to.
medicine anymore.
And that is because the immune system when it's bogged down with all this inflammatory food and infections, it's like, I can't deal with the pollen. I cannot take one more thing. And so it reacts. When it's not doing anything because it's calm and it's settled, it's like, oh, pollen, I can handle that. Oh, this grass, I can handle that. So I find that, again, if someone has like a true allergy to a cat or a dog, like that doesn't go away when you stop eating gluten. But your environmental allergies get so much better when your gut has more space to deal with it.
Interesting. I want to go back to a little bit of the maybe societal view and specifically the word resiliency, because I know the human brain is a very powerful thing, and this, I'm referring back to kind of little tidbits of what everyone has said here. But I think about myself, honestly, and I'm just going to use myself as an example. I have 0 restrictions. I don't restrict from anything. I eat whatever I want, whenever I want it. Now, at 47, that has changed. I'm not, double cheeseburgers, all day or anything like that. I do tend to gravitate towards healthier foods, but I don't restrict at all. And I know for a fact, you do too, that I suffer from lots of symptoms. I do. I could list all the joints, the back pain, the neck, the allergies, the environmental allergies, all this, the stomach stuff. Like, yet I just go on about my day, right? And I guess that's where I'm going is, so many people just kind of
Live that way.
Sure.
I think, yes, and like you're like aware of it, right? A lot of people, I think, just aren't aware. Then some people are aware but don't want to do anything. And I think some people are so desperate they have to do something.
Right.
Yeah, and there's nothing that's happened that you're like, I can't get out of bed. I can't go to work.
I can do this because I did get bedridden for 3 days because I couldn't, like my body had calcified and my husband had to literally pick me up to get me out of the bed to use the bathroom. So like, I think when you're in the depths and having to deal with fighting suicidal thoughts and not being able to get out of bed and things like that, you do something about it. But I don't know if you're feeling like kind of okay. I don't blame you. I kind of think I keep going.
That's the point. Is that there are so many people out there that are not in the depths, and I totally get the depths. I've battled my own addictions, and those were the depths that created the change that I needed. But how many people are walking around being affected a lot?
A lot.
It's a lot. I mean, again,
mental health wise.
I think we have an incredible capacity to handle a lot of things. Right?
Sure.
That's true.
And we're evolving more too, right?
At a certain point, however, as you mentioned, once you start piling things on, right? So let's just say food, or if you have an infection, or you have a heavy metal, or you have this, or you have this, or you have this, or you have this. And then let's say all of a sudden, God forbid, your child gets sick and that stress hits you, or your parent gets sick and that stress hits you, or, you get fired from work and that stress hits you. Now there's a whole nother cascade of inflammation and immune dysregulation that happens. Or let's say we get exposed to some virus that no one's ever been exposed to. And all of a sudden now we have a cascade of people who are having, symptoms and problems that we've never seen before, long COVID and manifestation. So yes, the human organism, we all have an incredible capacity to handle a lot of stuff. And yet, at some point, something starts to get dysregulated. So from what we look at, for example, from a cardiovascular risk standpoint, right? The number one killer still in the United States is going to be cardiovascular disease for everyone. Well, how does that manifest? Well, for a lot of people, we start looking at not just blood markers, we look at anatomical markers. We start looking at soft markers in their hormones, in their gut even, as to, hey, this is kind of contributing to, your risk of these things. So, I think resiliency is one of our incredible superpowers as human species. And yet we also have limitations when so many things start to hit us. And I think stress and sleep are two big things that we often sort of just take as part of our
life.
I'm just stressed. Like, what am I supposed to do about it? Like, I didn't sleep last night. I haven't slept, actually, now that I think about it, well for the last 9 years. Like, so Yeah, that's going to affect how you deal with anything, be it an infection, be it a virus, be it mold exposure. Like, so that is something that we have to, again, talk about it from a system kind of approach. Like our system and how then all the other variables are going to start influencing it is kind of what we want to focus on.
Well, and I mean, I automatically think about this resiliency we speak of. While it may be a superpower, it's a negative as well, right? I mean, I can handle a fifth of liquor a day.
Well, I think if you're ignoring signs that are big red blinkers, that you are building a false sense of resiliency or strength by compensating or doing behaviors that at the end of the day are not going to be positive for you.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't know how it's affecting your longevity.
Yeah.
That's where I was going.
You could die 10 years earlier than you would, and you would never know the difference because there's nobody has a crystal ball.
Yeah.
That's
kind of what I was getting.
We talk a lot about health span and lifespan. Like, most people in the United States, if you look at the data, like lifespan, 72.3 years. Health span, which is the time you spend actually healthy, starts to go down right around 63. Yeah.
Oh, wow.
Right. So,
the kids aren't seeing it's like, does it start at 5?
Yeah. So the idea is, how do you really want to build that roadmap of like health span and longevity and staying, we talk to our clients about how do you stay healthier for longer and like in an optimal way of functioning, because that's the ideal. Like you want to be 85, 90 and still be able to do a lot of the activities that you want to enjoy. And the reality is, for a lot of Americans, and just talking the United States, it's becoming more challenging with all the, health issues that we're having.
Yeah, there's a lot of things that look normal, like talking about the brain. Like I think this is the right statistic, but every decade that your hemoglobin A1C is 5.5 or higher, your brain is shrinking 3%. So this is a marker that measures your blood sugar over an average of what your blood sugar is doing over the last 3 to 4 months. A lot of doctors don't even check it, like literally never check it. And so this is what heads towards diabetes. But you could live in this pseudo state of never becoming diabetic, but teetering on this higher level for decades. And it will never show up because you never advance all the way to diabetes. So you don't get neuropathy. You don't get anything with your vision. You don't ever know it. No doctor ever checks it. And then you have dementia. It's like one of the leading causes of dementia, elevated blood sugar that maybe never even turned to diabetes. You never knew. And so people live. Why does everybody in this country have dementia? Because everyone's eating carbohydrates and sugar. And then people say, well, my dad, my mom, my uncle, my whatever has dementia, but they don't have diabetes. I'm like, but I bet if you were to look at their labs over the last 40 years, a high percentage of them will show that it was their blood sugar. It was their diet. It was a problem. You just didn't know it.
I think
you end up with all these issues when you're older.
Those kind of things where like an autoimmune doesn't happen overnight. Dementia doesn't happen overnight. Alzheimer's doesn't happen overnight. It's those just a lifestyle over time.
And it just kills me. People all the time, my patients are talking about their elderly family members, like they were so healthy and then they just died of this one thing. I'm like, that's not healthy.
Right. They weren't.
You can't, those can't go in the same sentence. They were so healthy, but they died of
cirrhosis.
But we really think that. We really think if they didn't have this one thing, they would have stayed healthy and alive. And it's like, no, it wasn't just that one thing. They had so many things going on. It was ridiculous. Yeah. But we think they're healthy.
Yeah. I mean, it's that multiple levers of inflammation that, again, kind of talking about kind of what we talk a lot about in sort of longevity medicine too, is sort of this idea of aging and inflammaging, right? So this concept as this low grade,
it's a t-shirt,
kind of low grade festering inflammation that has multiple sort of, foundational like reasons why it's happening. And that basically is accelerating this aging process. Hemoglobin A1C being, and the typical statistic is about anyone who has like a pre-diabetic range of hemoglobin A1C at about 5.7 to 6.4, they can spend in that range about 5 to 15, sometimes 20 years before a full-blown diabetes may develop. And the unfortunate part of it is that it's completely reversible, right? And so as you start to identify the inflammatory triggers that could be involved, dialing those down to kind of reduce it over time. And there's a lot of new thinking, especially with Alzheimer's and vascular dementia and Parkinson's, all of these things. And again, we could go down multiple rabbit holes down this thing, but the idea being that inflammation is a big driver for a lot of these things. And then what else is at root of these at this? Is it a gut dysbiosis? Is it a mold toxicity, hormone imbalance? Like there's so many ways that you can go down the kind of pathway to look at these dementias. But again, it's I think the message for listeners too is to like, hey, it's reasonable to ask these questions. It's reasonable to start thinking about inflammation as not always your friend. It's important. Like if you hurt yourself or you have a twist your ankle or something, that inflammation is good. But there's
otherwise
a dysregulated inflammation that we want to be aware of. So,
and the inflammaging thing is just become acceptable. Like it's so sad that we think it's normal to gain weight as we get older. It's normal to start having joint pain as we get older. It's normal to start our memory to start going as we get older. We literally accept it. Like my patients come in all the time. Well, isn't this normal? I'm getting older. You should have complete brain function till the day you die. There's nothing. Should your skin wrinkle? Yes. Should certain things happen? Yes. But there's nothing that should say your brain should tank. Like your brain has the full ability to stay sharp your whole life. Other things cannot. Like I mentioned with your skin, people doing all bending over backwards, spending thousands of dollars trying to do things that you really can't stop. And then things that we can stop, like our brain deteriorating or other things, we just accept, well, I'm just going to let that happen because that's normal, but I'm going to do everything I can to not get a wrinkle. It's just it's misinformation about what should be happening as we age.
Mm-hmm. So one last thing, we're going to have to wrap up here in a sec, but and I know that part of this has been already discussed and we might be repeating ourselves, but I know that our listeners have heard the gut-brain connection. And we often hear, the brain creating symptoms in the gut. And I think what's happening more now is the gut having an effect on the brain. And I think that obviously is very relevant in your journey. But I would love to just hear from both of you on maybe more of a biological explanation of that and kind of layman's terms of what that connection actually is and how, we have mental health pandemic in this country.
There's so much about the gut that we don't understand, first and foremost. The amount of bacteria, parasites, viruses, and other sort of bacteria that exists in the gut, probably number in the trillions and trillions, right? And so what all those do, we're just starting to scratch the surface, but there's a lot of research being done. And one of the things is that certainly the gut, from the bacteria that exists there and what chemicals and things they produce, and then how they produce serotonin, which is something that helps to calm your brain, how they help produce other hormones, how they help produce other chemicals that help with, functioning day to day for you as an organism. We're just really starting to scratch the surface with a lot of that. And some of the fascinating research, and I'll just talk about some of the research. There's like a researcher at Caltech that's looking now, going back to kind of the Parkinson's and dementia piece and Alzheimer's piece and autism piece, of doing fecal transplants where they actually take the gut bacteria that's in a diseased animal and then replanting with healthy, bacteria. And then what happens to symptoms? And you see resolution of a lot of these symptoms. And it's a researcher at Caltech, last name Manzanian, I believe is his last name. And you read it and you're like, this is fascinating stuff. And yet there's so much there still that has to be explored and explained before we can just say, all right, everyone's going to line up for fecal transplants and we're going to heal everything, right? So the thing is that, yes, when we talk about brain gut, like, I like how you said it. Yeah, often the brain dictates it. Actually, and what more and more research is probably showing is that gut is telling us what's happening up here, right? And so not only is it the bacteria, but it's the foods that we bring in and how it kind of gets converted into our system and how we absorb things as their inflammation. And I often tell our clients, think about what you came in with, be it a rash, be it anxiety, be it lupus, be it whatever it may be, as the end result of a lot of dysregulated inflammation that has occurred. Now, as we identify those things, the gut is going to be one place that we're going to focus, but it's one system that we need to focus on of the many different systems that we're going to start talking about. So I think it's a huge, huge place of, in the next 10 to 15 years, some incredible, remarkable stuff is going to be coming out. It's exciting for those of us that kind of do this day to day. I just think we're starting to scratch the surface.
Yeah.
Of a lot of it.
And biologically, in another simple way, the neurotransmitters that serve our brain are made in our intestines.
Yeah.
So that's just a very basic explanation. Like if you think about what controls our mood in our brain, if that's made in our intestines and our intestines are inflamed, it's very easy to understand why you feel depressed if you don't have the proper balance of neurotransmitters.
How is that made in our intestines? Can you explain that?
Both bacteria. There's bacteria, and then there's actually cells. There's different cells, enterochromaffin cells that produce serotonin. The base chemicals for a lot of our neurotransmitters are generated and produced from the foods that we eat, then the bacteria turning them into chemicals, absorption, and then it gets,
all the bacteria gives off different chemicals. So that's like gas. Like when the bacteria, you eat something, it feeds the bacteria releases gas, and then you're bloated, gaseous. So then you get a huge imbalance in the proper chemicals that you need to make the proper neurotransmitters. So then it just doesn't happen. A huge link with anxiety is the vagus nerve. So the vagus nerve is around our intestines. It goes around our heart. It goes to our brain. So if your gut is a wreck, it's like an alarm system. It's like your body is trying to tell your brain, hey, there's a problem here. There's a problem here. So you physically feel your chest, your heart racing, your chest pounding. You feel anxious. And so that is why it can change so quickly. Like if you get on a low inflammatory diet, in 3 days, you're in a much better place inflammatory wise. So that's likely why you stop having panic attacks, because your vagus nerve is not just trying to tell your brain, hey, there's a problem, there's a problem, there's a problem.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And there's neurotransmitters to further kind of talk about that is there's excitatory, inhibitory, and calming types of neurotransmitters, and sort of the balance of those is certainly related to sort of infections or other things that you may be exposed to, chemicals, et cetera, and foods certainly, and thinking about foods that trigger a histamine release. Well, if you have more of that, then you're going to be way more agitated, right? And so there's low histamine diet. I mean, there's a lot of those things that kind of help to start managing very quickly, especially the symptoms you were feeling, and feeling more balanced, and then working on the next steps is kind of where you probably need to orient to.
And sugars were a big one for you, right?
Any kind of, carbs and sugars. So I eat a grain-free diet. I have for 5.5 years. I don't eat any grains. I don't eat any gluten, dairy. I don't eat legumes. I monitor different types of vegetables. I keep fruit to a very minimum.
She's big on meat.
Well, I do like 75% vegetable and 25% meat and fish. So I try to, I literally make my plate and I'm like, okay, how does it look? But yes, to me, protein is huge for my body. That works really well. I seem to like a high fat diet and high protein vegetables. Yes, but there are so many vegetables that have been, I'll say, problematic for me, with FODMAPs and so forth, that I can eat it a little bit, but like a salad, good. I can eat a salad. But anyway, it's just kind of, and I think that's the thing to encourage people to do is, a doctor, I think, can help hold your hand. Nutritionists can help you get there and everything, but so much of it has to be on you because you're the only one who knows what it feels like that you got splotches on your tongue, or your eyes are super dry, or you have your fingers are moving without you moving them, or your arms are going numb, or you have pain shooting up your back, or these are symptoms that I've had. You know what I mean? That you've got to start noting that that's your body not liking something and taking note of it. But you're the only one who can feel those sensitivities. A sensitivity test or allergy test can't necessarily tell you that stuff. So I think it puts a lot of the, I don't know, a lot of the weight of the problem on the individual if they're willing to take on their own health and, follow the counsel of doctors of how to make it happen. But you've got to do it yourself.
Yeah.
That's true.
Yeah.
That's probably one of the biggest challenges you all have
I've
is
heard that before.
compliance with what you're
But it's
suggesting.
hard too, the awareness. I mean, it's so hard explaining to someone, like you're talking about your eyes are dry or your neck hurts or whatever. So many people, they'll reintroduce the food and they'll have a symptom, but they just cannot have the awareness to realize that was from the food. So then it's just like they think that food is fine.
Is it awareness or is it, I love that food so much that I'm not going to change it?
I've seen
Some of
so.
Is that your problem, Robbie?
That's my problem.
I've seen so many
It's all right
patients,
here.
and I say the same thing. I'm like on repeat every month, and I'll have a patient that I've seen for many times, and they'll just say, come in, this, that, and the other is going on. I'm like, did you change something with your diet? They're like, oh yeah, and I'm like, we know each other. We have done this before. Hello. And they're just like, I didn't even think about it. And I'm like, okay. So I see they are truly not aware. They are not hiding it. They're not trying to get around it. It just doesn't even dawn on them.
Yeah.
And so that makes it so hard.
Yeah, it does. And I mean, I think we could go down another rabbit hole of food addiction, addiction to flavors and nostalgia and things that we're used to and preferences and all that. I mean, that is where I feel like my biggest issue is, because I do have symptoms. I am aware, but I choose to live with it. Yeah. And it sucks. And I'm reaching that that cap. I got to make a change. All right, so let's finish with some takeaways for the listeners. I mean, I'm sure we have a spectrum of people that deal with different things based on all that we've talked about. There's people probably all the way at your level, Jamie, and then there's people that may, be very conscious about what they eat and still not know that they might be being affected by, what they're consuming. Can we put together a very general good foods to start with to eat and not eat?
I keep it simple. Eat real whole foods. Eat as organic as you possibly can. Avoid as much as possible ultra-processed or highly processed foods. Keep simple white carbohydrates to a limited amount. That's how I would start. Drink a lot of water. Hydrate. And then sleep, stress, exercise management. Those are the big things that I focus on.
Got it.
I have people start with completely avoiding gluten, dairy, corn.
Gluten, dairy, corn.
And oats as much as possible because they mimic gluten. But if, when you eat an inflammatory food, that food is out of your system in 3 to 4 days, but the inflammation that remains is about 3 weeks. So even if you're eating it once a week or every other week, you're keeping the inflammation going. So if you can completely remove those foods, then, after 3 weeks, you can really see signs of inflammation going down, and then you have to keep it going. If you then just eat it after 3 weeks, then you just started it back over.
Right.
So,
yeah, and some of those will be faster too than others. Yeah,
right.
Too. Yeah.
Well, you heard it here. Thank you, all of you, Dr.
Thank you,
Jorge,
Robbie.
Dr. Fodel,
Thanks for
my
having
friend
us.
Jamie Brown.
Yeah.
Thank you so much. Thank you all.